It was 5:30 when I left the doctor's office, right into the evening rush hour, with one hand clutching my medical file and a small bag of prescriptions and the other carrying groceries. I struggled to fit onto a packed city bus, and that's when my phone started buzzing like crazy. A nice young woman offered to hold my grocery bag for a moment, giving me just enough room to dig into my coat pocket. When I was told I had cancer, I didn't know how to break the news to my family. The medical report had been sitting on the table for 3 days without anyone asking me a single question. Leona's piercing voice rang through the receiver, asking, "Why haven't you picked up Zach from school yet? His teacher just called HEK, the only child left in the classroom, and he's crying his eyes out." Panic swept through my chest, and I hurriedly asked, "Did someone pick him up already?" I told Daniel this morning that he was supposed to pick up his son today because I had a doctor's appointment this afternoon, but before I could finish, she interrupted me with an irate, "Oh my God, Clara, what could possibly be more important than Zach? He's still at school, you need to get over there now." "I can't leave," she added in a huff. I had already organized dinner and gone shopping with my girlfriends, and Daniel had. I felt a sharp tightness in my chest. My hand hovered over the screen, about to dial James, but I froze as the doctor's words echoed in my mind. "Your body's already very weak, you'll need someone to accompany you during future treatments. And you must avoid stress and household chores as much as possible." He probably forgot as usual, and I opened my mouth to say that I wouldn't make it in time either and that James could probably go instead, but she hung up just before the call dropped. If I'm no longer good enough to help, then perhaps it's time for everyone to take care of their own responsibilities since he's their child, not mine. I stood there on the bus in a daze as it passed 2 more stops without my noticing, and then my phone rang again. This time it was James. "Clara. Have you been out and about all day? Do you even realize Zach is still at school waiting for someone to pick him up? I just got home when Leona called me in a panic, saying, 'I tried calling you but couldn't reach you. Why haven't you gone to get him yet?' The teacher had been waiting there the entire time. Can you imagine how upset Zach must be?" His voice kept coming through, full of reprimands, tightening my chest even more, but I remained silent when he finally stopped talking. He paused for a moment before snapping, "What kind of talk is that, Clara? Don't take this the wrong way. But Zach is our grandson. I'll go pick Zach up myself today. You just head home and get dinner started. The kids have been working hard all day. It's not right if they come home to an empty table." I wanted to let him know that I wasn't feeling well, that my body was already running on fumes after all the hospital visits, but I didn't want to say that. Words came to a halt in my throat, and I forced myself to stop complaining after years of swallowing every pain, fatigue, and emotion because, at best, it made me feel dismissive. For the first time, I didn't answer, and I hung up the phone before he could say anything more. James has had an easy life. He was born into a well-educated family, and even as a young man, his career went smoothly from the beginning. This year, he retired from his position as director of the local art museum. Decades of exposure to the arts have given him a quiet, cultured elegance that still, at 67. In addition, he never had to deal with the messier aspects of life, and truly he never had to because his mother took care of everything from his early years to our marriage. He never had to worry about the house, and he has never even washed his own socks. James is adamant that a gentleman should avoid the kitchen, believing that household chores only serve to tarnish his artistic aura. Even after he retired, he remained busy as ever, participating in senior centers, choir practice, dance, violin lessons, and more. His schedule is more packed than it was while he was employed, and everyone calls him Professor James the Talented. As the bus passed familiar streets, I realized that we were getting close to home, but for some reason, life slipped through my fingers. The Renaissance man was admired and adored, and his calendar was always full. Our kids knew better than to expect him to help out, and no one ever asked him to help with pickups or babysitting. I also studied painting, and once in college we were both in the oil painting program. I had promised my professors that I would, but after that, I fell deeply and deeply. Maybe it was just the early symptoms of the cancer, the exhaustion, the dull ache, and my bones, but suddenly I didn't feel like going home anymore. The truth is, though, I had nowhere else to go. My parents were long gone, and most of my old friends had their own families and busy lives. I stared blankly out the bus window, and for the first time in my 65 years of life, I felt a wave of deep sadness wash over me. About 15 minutes later, my phone rang for the 3rd time. "Clara. Why aren't you home making dinner yet? Zach is having a tantrum, saying he's starving. Daniel is about to get home too, and I don't cook, so do we just sit around and wait?" James's voice wasn't very loud, but in the noisy bus I could still hear every word clearly. Long ago, I had been enchanted by his deep, steady voice, which never failed to calm me down, even during arguments. Now, however, every word felt like a slap. It turns out that even the most pleasant voice can be ugly when it's used to reprimand and belittle. The rose-colored lens I'd seen him through for decades was shattered in an instant, so I didn't even bother to respond with emotion. You two are well over a century old. James has always been arrogant and irascible, and he never asks for help or backs down. I ended the call twice in one day, which was more than his ego could handle. However, a short while later, my son Daniel called, saying, "What's going on with you lately, Mom? You didn't pick up Zach, you didn't cook, and now you're arguing with Dad. He's so upset, he's lost his appetite. Come on, we're just trying to have a normal evening. You're not getting any younger either, so what are you trying to prove?" He barely finished speaking before his sister Anna took the phone away from him, her voice brimming with "Since then, unless it was the weekend or a special occasion for dining out, they have come here for dinner almost every weekday." I treated Zach and Olivia the same way, picking them up from school, feeding them, and helping with their homework. On most days, I would pick Olivia up from preschool and head straight to Zach's elementary school. Olivia said she wanted grandma's spaghetti bowl and why, her favorite, and you better hurry back or she's going to throw a fit again. I said nothing. Picking up groceries on the way and rushing home to prepare a big, lively dinner for everyone had become our routine. However, since Olivia's other grandmother had arrived, I hadn't needed to pick her up, so I wasn't sure what to say. Should I blame myself for failing to raise my children properly, creating a household full of dependents who never learned how to stand on their own? After a long pause, I said flatly, "You can eat without me tonight, I won't be coming home for dinner." Finally, the world fell silent somewhere along the way. The bus had already passed my stop, and darkness had descended on the unfamiliar city streets outside the window, but tonight I had a seat to myself for the first time. It's ironic that I skipped making one dinner, and then everyone came after me like I had committed some horrible crime. But the breast cancer diagnosis report had been on the coffee table in the living room for 3 full days, and not a single person had asked me about it. They sit on that couch every day, glued to their phones, watching TV, playing games, and even replacing the fruit with fresh ones every day. They never ask or notice, just reach out and help themselves, but somehow, not a single one of them has looked at the medical report next to it. Did my name being printed on the cover make it invisible to everyone by default, like I had lived in that house for decades? My children constantly tell me, "Mom, you really lucked out marrying Dad. You never had to work, and you got to be the elegant wife of an art museum director." Relatives rave about how James raised the entire family and provided for all of their needs. My chest ached again, and I turned to face the window, hoping that no one would notice that I was crying. At my age, there's always that fear of appearing pitiful to strangers, and the city lights outside were blurred in the veil of tears, flickering far away and unreachable. A pale hand suddenly reached into my vision. The same sweet young woman from earlier offered me a tissue. "Are you okay?" she asked, smiling gently. "The breeze by the windows is pretty strong, so be careful not to catch a cold." "Oh, when I saw the bag of medicine you're holding, I figured maybe you weren't feeling well." I accepted the tissue and nodded, my voice catching as I whispered, "Thank you," but as I wiped, the more I wiped, the harder the tears fell until it felt like everything inside me was finally pouring out. This was the first time my family had shown me in years. Something inside me shifted, I said. If love must beg for, and a home must be earned by sacrifice alone, then perhaps it was never truly mine in the first place, and if so, I'm done wanting it. When the bus arrived at its last stop, everyone else got off, and I stood up unsteadily, swaying a little as I grabbed my bags. The young woman saw and instantly stepped in again, taking the majority of the weight off my arms without hesitation. I said, "Thank you so much," feeling truly moved. "You must be exhausted yourself, commuting this far after work must be tough." She waved it off with a smile. "No, I'm actually just an intern at the hospital where you had your appointment." She added, almost sheepishly, "I got off several stops ago, but you looked like you weren't doing so well. I just wanted to make sure you were okay, so I stayed with you." "Do you live nearby?" I froze for a second, feeling guilty. "Oh, no, I don't live here." "I'm so sorry. Thank you for caring." "I'm fine. I just feel terrible for bothering you." "You don't need to apologize," she said gently. "If anything, you should take a cab home. You're not feeling well, don't push yourself. I can just catch a bus back from the other side of the street. It's easy, no?" I said firmly. I insisted on walking her to the curb, and I hailed a cab, ushering her in with me. I then gave directions to go toward mine. "Brought anything with me today?" I was only supposed to go in for a routine checkup, so I had to head back and start packing my things. As she got out of the car, she turned back with a final warm smile. "Ma'am, you know that medicine has come a long way, so don't give up hope that everything will work out just fine." I waved goodbye, and somehow, all the weight and bitterness of the day felt a little lighter. An hour ago, back near home, I passed a restaurant just outside our neighborhood. It had a reputation for being upscale and expensive, and James and the kids had mentioned it numerous times. They had only been there for formal dinners or special occasions, though, and they were always complimenting how sophisticated it was. For the first time in my life, I turned and walked in. I was a housewife who saved money, cooked meals, did laundry, and didn't need to experience fine dining. The groceries I had previously bought were long gone and thrown into a trash can after I got off the bus. I used to worry about every dollar trying to save for my kids and grandkids. Calling a cab used to feel like a luxury I had to justify, but now that I'm sick, I realize if I don't know how many days I have left, so I tasted every bite of the meal they used to rave about and silently realized it wasn't all that special. I'm not some idiot who can't tell good from bad, I've just never been given the chance to make my own decisions. After dinner, I took a leisurely walk home, letting the food settle in my stomach, and when I got to the door, it was past 10. The house was in a mess, with the dining table looking like a battlefield, the dining room looking like a small hurricane had swept through, and the living room a mess. Out in the backyard, James and Daniel, along with Anna's husband, were drinking beer and talking about retirement plans and stock market trends as if there were no concerns at all. James had always had stomach problems, and I usually kept a close eye on him to make sure he stayed away from alcohol, but tonight he was drinking freely, so I changed into my house slippers and stood there for a moment without anyone even looking up. Leona and Anna were lounging on the couch, chewing on fried chicken wings, and Zach and Olivia were sitting nearby, mimicking the adults, each of them clutching a bag of snacks and glued to their tablets while playing games in the backyard. Leona was the first to notice me. She gave me a quick glance with an impatient expression before turning back to the TV without saying anything. I then walked quietly across the room toward the master bedroom, but as I turned the corner into the hallway, I saw someone I hadn't expected to see. She looked just as surprised as Clara, who said, "You're finally back." I was just telling James that it's late, and I was worried that it wasn't safe for you to be out alone. In actuality, Vivian had been in my house since she moved into one of the upscale condos nearby last year. She had visited a few times, always as a courteous guest, but seeing her leave, my James had many admirers back then, but only Vivian ever truly captured his heart. They had been entangled for years, never officially together but never really apart, and shortly after graduating, she married a real estate tycoon who was 20 years her senior. The bedroom was a soft, silky set with tousled hair and sleepy eyes. Vivian was once the star of the East Coast Ballet Conservatory, a graceful goddess who had every young man's heart in the palm of her hand. It seemed that time had been especially kind to her. I assumed that chapter with Vivian had been buried long ago, and James never spoke of her again. We both pretended those years never happened, but when Vivian moved back and made her first visit, I remembered how stiff and uncomfortable their reunion had been. James never offered me a grand romance, but he did give me one clear condition: if we married, I would have to give up my career completely and dedicate myself to supporting his artistic pursuits at home, which I faithfully did year after year. Even though we still had unresolved history, it didn't take long for James to rekindle our connection, and it was obvious that things had progressed further than I had been told. Daniel lit up when he saw me. "Mom, are you finally back, or have you been this late? We tried calling you so many times, but you didn't answer." Then he turned toward the couch and called out, "Good thing," Anna thought quickly and ordered Mexican takeout. "We just finished eating. Now you can get started on cleaning the table, doing the dishes, and mopping up," my son-in-law added, with a playful smile, waving his beer bottle. "How about making a little something extra, like popcorn or a cheese platter? Is in such a good mood tonight that I believe he's ready for another round." Before I could even open my mouth, Vivian jumped in, flustered and eager to explain. "Clara, please don't be upset. I just felt a little dizzy earlier, and it was too noisy outside. James suggested that I lie down in your room for a while. The kids were all in the living room, so I assure you that it's not what you think." As soon as he heard her, he put down his drink and hurried over. "Are you feeling better now?" he asked, his voice cold enough to frost glass. "This behavior is totally unacceptable." I looked up at him, and a bitter smile tugged at the corner of my lips. "Oh, and what about a guest who ends up lying in the master bedroom in the middle of the night? What kind of behavior is that supposed to be? And you, James Blake, the retired director of the Art Museum and champion of elegance and refinement, what exactly do you call letting a single woman into your wife's bed when she's not home?" His face darkened instantly. "And you're purposefully creating drama? This is pure slander." Vivian flushed, and she gently tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Stop, it's I would never have used that room if I had known Clara would be upset," but my chest was already burning, my breath was shallow with rage, and I didn't want to hear another word. I turned and headed for the bedroom without bothering to answer, the tension in the room suddenly suffocating. No one said anything, and Anna rushed after me, catching my arm in an attempt to stop me. "Mom, what's gotten into you?" Anna said in a tone tinged with annoyance. "You're being really harsh." Vivian was simply not feeling well, and she caught a bit of a cold from her father, who only invited her over for dinner so she wouldn't be alone while she was ill. She paused, then added, "You were kind of in the wrong today, so what if Dad said a few words to you?" Zach was stuck at school, of course. We were all. Daniel nodded next to her, softening his tone a bit as he approached Anna's house. "You've been home all day, and perhaps you're unaware of how exhausting things are out there. We're always running around, coming home, and discovering that there's no dinner. It's frustrating, and perhaps we were a little harsh, but don't take it personally." I looked at these kids, my kids, and felt a cold emptiness seeping deeper inside of me. There was no word of concern, not a single question about where I'd been, whether I'd eaten, or whether something had gone wrong, just judgment, excuses, and expectations. Then Leona's eyes flicked to the pharmacy bag in my hand, and her mouth curled into a mocking smile. "You seem to be having a leisurely day stocking up on all those supplements again. I've told you 100 times that those things are a scam, a complete waste of money. You'd be better off spending it on gifts for Zach and Olivia, at least they'd enjoy it." She said in a sarcastic tone. "Exactly, CLA. Zach was practically crying from hunger earlier. He's still so young. What if something had happened because he skipped a meal?" She gave a little laugh and added, "If you're really bored, maybe take a page from Vivian's book." He turned to me in an attempt to soften the blow, saying, "Mom, it's late, the dishes can wait till morning. Why don't you help the kids get ready for bed?" Olivia said she wanted to sleep over tonight, and I slowly turned my gaze toward each of their faces, which I knew so well, and felt only a cold, bone-deep fatigue, not a flicker of warmth, not even a trace of real concern for me as a person. They were all so quick to assign me tasks, to reprimand me, and to use me, but not a single one had inquired how I was feeling, whether I had eaten, or why I had arrived home so late. This so-called family affection didn't even come close to the kindness of a stranger on a city bus. Sometimes it's not anger that takes over, but numbness. I finally spoke in a calm and even tone, but every word fell like a stone. "I need to formally tell you all that you are all grown adults with your own lives and families, and that it's time to wean off. As of right now, I'm no longer your unpaid friend. You have your own dinner on the table, no more school pickups, and no more housework taken for granted. If you need it done, figure it out on your own. If you feel the sudden urge to take care of some poor, fragile old friend, go ahead. I won't stop you or interfere, but don't worry about me, I won't be a need." Either way, the room went into stunned silence as soon as I said it, and everyone looked at each other uneasily. Daniel was the first to say, "Mom, what are you saying?" His voice was tinged with disbelief. "We all work full-time jobs, and without you, we wouldn't even be able to pick up the kids from school." Anna immediately clarified, "We don't get off work until 6 or later. How are we supposed to come home and cook dinner too? Are you just planning to let us go hungry?" Leona scoffed, her tone laced with annoyance. "It's not like we actually think of you as a maid or anything, Clara. James is always busy with his community activities to manage things at home, and, to be honest, you don't have a job, so helping out a little isn't a big deal, right? It's just something to keep you from getting bored." One by one, they all tried to convince me, arguing with me as though I was being unreasonable, but all I felt was a slow, searing fire rising in my chest. "I'm not bored," I said coldly, "and if you really think all of this is no big deal, then try doing it yourselves for a full day and see how easy it feels. I'm a human being, not your unpaid domestic help. I've spent decades running this house without a break. Now, it's my turn to relax." Anna noticed the change in my tone, and swiftly softening her voice, she quickly softened her voice and put her arm around mine like a child trying to placate a parent. "You shouldn't rest, but it's not like you're working because Vivian came over tonight, didn't she? She didn't do anything wrong, and we were all here. What's the harm?" As she spoke, my chest tightened, and I felt the dull ache under my ribs flare up again. I gently pulled my arm away and looked her in the eyes. My voice was calm but sharp, and every word was filled with purpose. "First, being at home doesn't mean I've been resting. If you don't believe me, try taking turns with the housework starting tomorrow, and then let me know how rested you feel. Secondly, Vivian is your father's guest, not mine. I won't speak for you between them, but don't use me to lighten the situation just because you don't want to face the truth." Perhaps it was the firm edge in my tone, something none of them had ever heard from me before, but then all of a sudden the room fell silent, and the air felt heavier. Then, with delicate fingers, Vivian stepped forward and dabbed at the corners of her eyes. Her voice trembled just enough to be heard. I'm really sorry, Clara, this was all my fault. I never meant to get in the way of you and James. I've really overstayed my welcome tonight, so I should leave without waiting for anyone to reply. She hurried to the front door, gathered her belongings, and put on her shoes. It was obvious she wanted to vanish as soon as possible, and the children were flustered, muttering behind her. Clara, before the door had even closed, there was a sharp slam that reverberated from the dining room. James had smacked his hand so hard against the table that it rattled the plates. That's enough. His voice exploded throughout the room. You've been acting strange since this afternoon. Coming home late was bad enough, but now you're picking fights left and right. Let's be honest, is this really just about dinner, or is it because I was taking care of Vivian? Why do you keep bringing up the past? Vivian had a fever, burning up to 101 degrees, and you still want to make a scene? His voice kept rising, sharp and impatient. The year when you became so petty, and with that he grabbed his phone and coat and stormed out after the others without even looking back because they all say that I've grown petty with age, so let me be petty to the end. I went straight back to the bedroom and started packing, not just for the night, but to get out of that bed, because I was leaving this house for good, and I didn't want to spend another day under this roof. In addition, the doctor had made it clear that I needed peace, not stress, but it hadn't even been 30 minutes since I had entered, and already my chest was tight and my breathing was uneven. James hadn't been gone long when the kids returned, assuming this was just another emotional outburst, and their voices floated toward me from the hallway trying to calm Mom. Dad was it's late, and Vivian shouldn't be out alone. Come on, Mom. Sure, she's stylish and well-groomed, but if there was truly something going on between her and Dad, it would have happened years ago. Now that he's 67, what will he do? Okay, Mom, we'll wash the kids up ourselves tonight and go to school as usual. Their voices are blurred together, and there's a dull hum of delegating and justifying every word, making the air around me feel heavier. I closed the bedroom door without saying anything. Packing didn't take long, and I only needed a few changes. After living in this house for decades, it was almost laughable how little it felt worth taking. The 2 rental properties my parents left me had always been in my name, and the rent was paid to me. Add to that the money I had carefully saved over the years, pinching pennies where I could, and I had enough to live comfortably on my own terms. I used to plan on transferring the properties to the kids when I turned 80, but thank God I hadn't done it yet, so I still had something to fall back on as I rolled my suitcase out of the bedroom. Anna's family had already left. Daniel was in the bathroom taking a bath, Zach. No one saw me, so I didn't care, didn't say goodbye, and left without turning around. The night air hit me like a quiet relief, but I stood there for a moment not knowing where to go next. They always said that I was sheltered and that I hadn't seen the world, so maybe now was the time, and if this illness really couldn't be cured, then I sure as hell wasn't going to end my life in a kitchen or laundry room. The doctor said that my radiation treatments wouldn't start until next week, so I had a few free days, so why not use them? I didn't know how to book plane tickets online, so I did the easiest thing I could think of. I called a cab and instructed the driver to take me straight to the airport. I stood in the terminal, watching the destination board flicker through names, chose a city I'd always wanted to see, and went up to the counter. I hesitated for a moment before boarding, and then I sent the family a brief, smooth message: I'm going on a trip, don't bother me, to prevent them from calling the police. Then I turned off my phone. The flight was short and smooth, and when the wheels touched down, the sky was still dark. I had landed in Portland, which I had seen in travel videos before and had always wanted to visit, the City of Roses, a botanical paradise on the west coast. If I had any passion left in life, it was plants, and my balcony was always filled with greenery, every inch of which reminded me that there was still something to look forward to. James never had time for travel, and he always claimed that Portland was too wet. The air there feels sticky, almost elegant, but I didn't need elegance, I just needed joy. When I turned my phone back on, a barrage of messages poured in like a broken dam. They had all seen my note and were now panicking. Mom, if you're gone, who's picking Zach up tomorrow? Dad doesn't know what we are supposed to eat. Don't be so stubborn. You probably just booked a hotel nearby, but you probably won't be home by morning, seriously. You don't even know how to use apps, and you don't have family nearby. What if you get scammed? What if you end up lost on the street? My eyebrows furrowed as I read until I saw the last message, which made me laugh bitterly and coldly. Since they kept buzzing in my ear, I decided to embrace the silence completely. I blocked all of them, blocked all of their numbers, and set all of their notifications to do not disturb. Honestly, there wasn't a single word from any of them that I wanted to hear, but it didn't take long for James to be confident that the house would manage just fine without you coming back and slapping him in the face. The very next morning, as soon as I turned my phone back on, I was hit with a barrage of unread messages. James was rushed to the hospital, as expected, because of his chronic stomach condition. After a full day of sightseeing, I slept like a rock and didn't hear a single missed call, voicemail, or text. Daniel's call came through almost instantly, "Mom," and his voice was thick with exhaustion. He tried to tough it out at first, believing he could handle the pain, but by the middle of the night, the pain had him doubled over. He searched the entire house for the medication, but to no avail. Finally, he woke Daniel up and asked him to help, but the pain had left him exhausted. His stomach ached so much that we had to take him to the G. I've been with him half the night, and I still have to get to work this morning, as well as drop Zach off at school. I can't handle all of this, so please, Mom, don't be like this. I listened quietly, then calmly replied, "Didn't you understand what I said yesterday? I'm on vacation, please don't disturb me." I hung up, and then I went one step further and blocked all the numbers so that nothing would ruin my trip. I hired a private VIP tour guide, and I spent the most carefree, liberating week I've had in decades seeing Portland. Attraction, tried all the food I'd been interested in, and eventually arrived at the botanical garden I'd always wanted to see. The biggest surprise was that I even had a full travel photo shoot thanks to my incredibly attentive personal guide, who not only showed me around but also served as my photographer and creative director, meticulously documenting every moment of my journey. When I saw the photos afterwards, I hardly recognized myself. My eyes were bright, my skin was glowing, and I had a lightness in my face that I hadn't seen in years. It turns out I could shine too, just like Vivian, as my guide even showed me how to use travel apps on my phone, such as ride-sharing services, flight and hotel reservations, maps, and travel reviews. Navigate the world without assistance for years. Every time I asked my kids to teach me something basic, like how to use a new app or look up a recipe, they would always dismiss me as being too impatient to bother. Now, however, I didn't need anyone. I hadn't been abandoned by the times. Day by day, I felt lighter and freer, and my body felt stronger and more energized. However, when I returned home after that lovely week away and turned on my phone, I was met with chaos as usual, a full-fledged domestic circus waiting at my door. Ultimately, it all came to this: once the unrelenting, all-capable supermom vanished from the home, everything started to fall apart, and only the worst. Then, only when they began looking for help did they realize how serious the issue was. They hired a housekeeper to cook and clean, but that didn't solve the problem because the housekeeper wouldn't look after the kids, a full-time nanny for the kids didn't do housework, and the daycare specialist who could look after Olivia wouldn't handle school pickups for Zach, who was now in first grade, so they needed a second nanny just for the afternoon shift. Additionally, James was still in the hospital, requiring constant care, so they didn't realize what I'd been all along, a full-service, on-call, multi-skilled domestic operator who charged nothing. What started out as finger-pointing and complaints turned into pathetic attempts to get me home. Zach and Olivia were even trained to alternately call their tiny voices chirping through voicemail, "Grandma, we miss you. Come back soon." Text. After text followed, "Sweetheart, sweet but desperate, Mom. Your protest has gone on long enough. Please come home. We really need you here at 3 a.m. Emma." One last note from Daniel: "My raw and disintegrating mother, when I landed, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I sat in the taxi and watched the familiar roads pass by, wondering how I would feel about going back, but some things needed to be resolved." As we pulled into the neighborhood, I noticed a small stage set up on the plaza. Apparently, the community was hosting an event. I looked indifferently toward it until I saw two familiar faces, James and Vivian. He was wearing a fitted black suit, and she was wearing a flowing crimson dress. The two of them danced a fiery tango under the lights, their eyes locked in subtle tension and unspoken electricity at every turn. Their glances felt like a whispered confession, a story conveyed without words. When the music stopped, the audience erupted in applause. James looked into the audience, scanning the faces, then froze when he saw me. We both stood still for a moment, said nothing, turned quietly, and walked away with my suitcase wheels clicking softly behind me. I stood there quietly watching, not feeling angry, just a faint, hollow ache rising in my chest. They had always been a couple meant to be in some way I could never compete with. I hadn't gone far when I heard footsteps, and James, catching up, took the suitcase handle from my hand without saying anything and began walking ahead of me as we headed home. When we got to the door, he paused, then said softly, "Clarissa, I'm glad you came back." I hesitated, and then I slowly followed him inside. The house was cleaner than I had anticipated. Obviously someone had hired a cleaning service, but my beloved houseplants told a different story. The majority of them had wilted from neglect, drooping sadly under the weight of a week's indifference, and no one had cared enough to keep them alive. I sat down, ready to finally have the conversation that needed to be had, but the front door opened just as I opened my mouth. Vivian's voice floated in gently as she entered the room, a soft complaint laced with mild surprise. Her eyes flicked to the suitcase next to me, and her hand instinctively tucked the house key she was holding behind her back. "Clarita, you're back," she said, trying to hide her discomfort with a forced smile. "Why didn't you tell us ahead of time? We would have picked you up." She proceeded to sit next to me with a polite smile, continuing her prepared explanation. "Oh, I meant to tell you earlier. I was just discharged a few days ago, and the house has been a complete mess. Daniel and Anna were worried that the temporary cleaners wouldn't do a proper job, and they were worried about the kids and James being left alone, so they asked me to move in for a few days to help out." I just nodded, but Vivian continued her conversation in a tone that was almost too casual. "If James hadn't been so reluctant to hire a full-time housekeeper, none of this would have been necessary. You really don't have to exhaust yourself trying to do everything in that part." I knew all too well that James had always been stubborn like that despite his income. He never permitted outsiders. I hadn't brought a living housekeeper back into our house for all these years, but I hadn't come back to rehash old habits or engage in small talk because I didn't want to waste any more of my time. I turned to face him, and his eyes were fixed on me. There was a flicker of something unreadable behind them, so I didn't bother easing into it. Instead, I went straight to the point. "James," I said calmly, "I want a divorce." His expression changed instantly, showing panic and even a brief moment of helplessness, an emotion I'd hardly ever seen on his face. However, it only lasted a moment before he composed himself again, returning to that cool, calculated poise he wore like armor. "Not funny," he said in a low voice, "for your age, and I'm not kidding." I said firmly, "I've been thinking about this seriously, especially over the past week for both of us, and this might just be the most honest form of relief." I paused, but he said, "I'm done living my life in the kitchen, and I have other things I want to do with the time I have left." His chest rose and fell with slow, controlled anger, and then the front door burst open, and Grandma Nana, Zach, and Olivia squealed in. The moment of warmth was fleeting, though. As soon as they saw Vivian on the sofa, they slipped out of my arms and ran toward her instead of Fairy Grandma. They circled around her, chattering excitedly, sharing stories from their day, laughing and giggling as they leaned into her lap. The scene stung quietly but deeply. A few seconds later, Daniel and Anna walked in, and the moment they spotted me, they hurried over and wrapped me in an embrace. "Mom, you're finally home. You look gorgeous. You must have had a wonderful trip. I'm falling apart without you. Thank God you're back, and honestly, that cleaning lady we hired wasn't working out anyhow, so we might as well let her go. You wouldn't believe it, Mom." Before anyone could say anything more, James slammed his glass down onto the table. The sharp sound reverberated through the living room enough, and his voice was low but it carried weight, tightly restrained, and simmering with frustration. "Do any of you even realize what you're doing? Your mother isn't your maid, she just got home, and you're already placing more duties on her?" I was taken aback by James's outburst, which completely silenced Daniel and Anna. He had spent decades standing quietly on the sidelines while I handled everything, never raising his voice on my behalf. I didn't have time to think about it, so I said calmly, "I'm sorry, but I won't be handling household matters anymore. You'll need to figure it out yourselves from now on." If there was nothing else, I turned to James. If not, I turned to him. "To the lawyer's office tomorrow morning and sign the paperwork." His face turned pale. He asked in a low, tight voice, "You're really going through with this?" Daniel and Anna, still in shock from the previous reprimand, looked even more shocked as they stared at me in shock at what Daniel had said. "Mom, you're getting a divorce. Why isn't this because of Aunt Vivian?" "Is it?" Anna added quickly. "She's just been helping out. We've seen everything clearly. There's nothing going on between her and Dad. You're overthinking this." I shook my head, figuring there was no point in explaining anything. Let James tell them whatever he wants. "Steady, I've given this a lot of thought, and I'm ending this marriage for good, Mom." "You're 65 years old," Daniel said, sounding desperate, "and you've been a housewife your entire life. How will you even manage after a divorce?" Someone else added, "Did someone out there fill your head with that live your own life stuff? Don't be naive, Mom." Daniel also added that he won't be as dependable as Dad. "They'll act sweet up front, but in the end, you'll just be their caretaker." Their words kept coming in, louder and more emotional, but all I felt was exhaustion. "I'm not asking for your thoughts," I cut in sharply. The air in the room thickened, and I knew exactly what James cared about most: pride, especially in front of others, especially Vivian. I added, just loud enough, "If you don't want to look foolish in front of her, then do it. Neither of you should interfere. I've dedicated decades to this household legally, and I'm entitled to half of everything plus the 2 properties and inheritance from my parents, more than enough for me to live comfortably. I don't need your concern. That shut them up. They looked genuinely shocked, obviously unaware that I'd planned all of this long ago. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years suddenly lifted, and I nodded gently. His jaw was clenched, and he nodded slowly, each word straining through his teeth. If that's what you want, we'll do it. I won't hold anything back. I needed it. Grace helped me find the same young woman who had once offered me a tissue on the bus. She had grown up in a small rural town, worked her way through school, and built a strong, self-made life in the city. After that night, when she heard about my situation, she took it upon herself to help find me a place to stay, even connecting me with a professional caregiver to help during my radiation. Once I settled in, I took her out to dinner to thank her. It was a warm, straightforward, and genuine conversation, the kind of conversation I hadn't had in years. That night, just as I was getting ready for bed, the family group chat lit up again, and I recognized the names and noise of Daniel, Anna, and her husband. They were all now taking turns trying to persuade. I didn't respond to any of it, but Daniel sent the message that really got to me. If you can walk away now when we need you the most, then don't expect anything from us in the future. Don't expect me to call you mom anymore. I stared at that message for a long time, and then, without hesitation, I left the group chat and blocked everyone except James. We still had paperwork to finalize after all that night, and finally, for the first time in a long time, I slept soundly the next day. As a courtesy, I ordered a car at 8:30 and went to the law office. I even texted James to remind him of the time and address, so I arrived early. James arrived at the door at 9:30 sharp, and only then did I finally breathe a sigh of relief. He was a far cry from the sophisticated man he always took pride in being. He was tired, disheveled, and stubbled. I wasn't surprised because it must have been unbearable to suddenly find himself beneath me in every way. We signed the agreement quickly and then went directly to City Hall to finalize the divorce paperwork. When we handed in the forms, the clerk paused. The clerk looked perplexed for a moment, perhaps wondering how 2 people who looked so polished could fall apart so neatly, but when she saw how clearly we divided everything, assets split 50-50 without any disputes, she skipped any mediation and simply processed the paperwork. As soon as the formalities were over, I turned and walked away, and James stood frozen behind me. She looked between us and asked casually, if we must give one, let's call it irreconcilable differences, but professionalism quickly took over. His face was even grayer than before, but I didn't look at him again while he was still stuck there. After that, everything felt lighter and freer. The radiation treatments were difficult, and sometimes my body hurt from exhaustion, but overall, it was manageable, and for the first time in decades, I had actual, unbroken space to breathe. Grace visited the hospital almost daily. Sometimes she helped me talk to the doctors, and other times she just sat with me during lunch, offering encouragement. With that quiet strength, she carried other patients who frequently whispered, "You're lucky to have such a thoughtful girl." In a small, conservative town where everything favored her younger brother, she worked her way through college, paid for her own tuition, and built a life without anything being handed to her. She had experienced more than most people knew, and the more I learned about her, the more I felt sorry for her. She had a quiet strength and resilience that I greatly admired, and somewhere along the way, I started thinking about asking her to be my goddaughter. Oddly enough, this was supposed to be the most peaceful time in my life, battling illness and starting over alone, but somehow, it had ended up being the most tranquil period I'd known in years. Most mornings were spent at the hospital, and the afternoons and evenings were mine, unhurried, but still the quiet could it got heavy, the silence allowed fear to creep in, and I was no different. The doctor told me to find a distraction and walk more to get fresh air to keep my emotions in check. Grace recalled that I had told her I had painted in college, and she kept gently encouraging me to try again, even just for fun, but I hadn't painted in decades, and I didn't even remember where to begin. The idea of holding a brush again felt alien and distant until one day, while taking a quiet walk, I passed a small, vintage-looking art studio tucked into a side street. The elderly woman sitting at an easel was painting very intently at first, and I was enthralled. I stood quietly behind her for almost 30 minutes before she turned around and we both froze. It was Diane, my college professor, who had once had the most faith in me. She was over 80 years old, her hair silver, her body frail, but she continued to paint, and her reputation had only grown over the years. When she recognized me, her face lit up with warmth and disbelief. "Clara, you still have that look in your eyes. I'd know you anywhere," he poured me. I told her everything about my life and the years that had gone by. She listened quietly and then looked at me with a steady gaze. "I always knew you had real talent," she said, "so don't let it go." I shook my head. It's been decades, and I've forgotten everything, she said, and then I started over from the beginning, just for myself. There was no pressure, think of it as a hobby that brings you joy. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. That night when I picked up a brush, my first attempts were awkward, my hands were stiff, my lines were shaky, and the techniques were long gone, but I was almost embarrassed by how rusty I'd become. After practicing steadily and slowly, I started to remember that I had regained my rhythm, and with it, I found a part of myself that I had thought I had lost forever. One afternoon, Diane looked over some of my practice pieces, and her eyes gleamed with quiet pride. I always told her that you weren't just a good student, there was emotion in your strokes, you tell stories with your colors, you have depth. She paused, then added, to be honest, Clara, if you hadn't married so young, you'd probably be a professional artist by now. I looked down, smiling faintly, and said, I'm sorry, Professor. I really wasted the gift you saw in me. She patted my hand gently and replied with a warm smile. When I first started, I blushed and nodded softly. This time, I truly believed her. Ever since I picked up the paintbrush again, my treatment days stopped feeling so heavy. Painting became my haven, my diversion, my therapy, and my rhythm. The hours went by more easily, the fear subsided, and even the pain seemed more tolerable while my hands were busy blending color on canvas, with the exception of the occasional interruptions from James, who started calling from random numbers after I blocked his number. He would always have some excuse, always something trivial. Do you remember where I put my gray suit? Did you take that old photo book from the guest room? What shirt should I wear to our cousin's wedding? Do you think that flower? I didn't understand what he was trying to do. After all these years apart, he and Vivian finally had no obstacles between them, and even the kids had come to accept her. Why was he still clinging to me in these strange, awkward ways? Perhaps old flames aren't always about passion, sometimes they're just habits that slow. He just bloomed. You want to come home and see it sometimes, and his voice came through thick with alcohol. It's already dark outside, so why aren't you home yet? All is his inability to let go until the final day of my first round of radiation. Grace and I had just left the treatment wing when we passed the courtyard, and I saw James and Vivian. She was sitting on a bench in the sun, and he was coming toward her with a prescription bag and a folder of test results in hand. The sun was shining softly on her face, so she raised her hand to shield her eyes, and James quietly took a pair of sunglasses out of his bag and put them on her. She gave him a gentle, tender smile that was effortless and natural, and I stood there motionless. James wasn't incapable of thoughtfulness, he hadn't done the small attentive gestures before. The way they moved together and the quiet ease between them seemed to be the end of a love story that's meant to feel complete. I tugged at Grace's sleeve, about to turn away, but James' expression changed in an instant, and he strode toward me in quick steps. Clara, are you following me? His voice was sharp and accusatory. Didn't you say you were over us? He grabbed my arm and confronted me as though I owed him an explanation, and I was flustered. Please don't misunderstand James, he was just helping me. He came with me to get a flu test because I've had a fever and am a little weak. We've signed the divorce papers, and while the divorce certificate may not have arrived yet, as far as I'm concerned, he's free. As soon as I finished speaking, Grace came forward, still wearing her hospital uniform. Her tone was firm and clipped, and she brushed James's hand off my arm. Sir, please keep your hands to yourself. This is a hospital, she said, turning to Vivian. If you're running a fever, put on a mask. This is a hospital. You're sick, she said, blushing and backing away. Asked in a hesitant tone, what do you think I'm doing here getting a facial? Grace snapped, what's wrong? Should I call someone? I can get you the best doctor, I said, cutting him off with a neutral expression. It's nothing major, I'm being discharged tomorrow, but thank you for your concern. I turned to leave, and James appeared to want to follow, but Vivian stumbled behind him, almost losing her balance, so he had no choice but to turn around and catch her. That's your ex-husband, she said. I nodded. That's your ex-husband, she said, laughing briefly. I assume that's your ex-husband. The next day, the official divorce certificate finally arrived in the mail, and 40 years of marriage were signed, sealed, and done. Just like that, the chapter closed, and all that was left of the past was to forget it. I did something I hadn't done in years, posted on social media, and cheered to myself for having the courage to choose freedom. I laughed honestly, and I shrugged, you're not wrong. Then it hit me that the things that once consumed me, once left me raw and restless, could now make me laugh. At this age, the news spread quickly, and family members and old friends began contacting me one by one with questions and concerns. Most of them didn't even try to hide their shock, so I kept giving them the same evasive response that we simply weren't compatible anymore, but no one bought it. One cousin sneered, "You're telling me after 40 years that you just now realized you weren't compatible." Others were more direct, some of them were amused, some were condescending, and Yuk later regretted it. One neighbor smirked and said, "Just wait till James finds someone else, and that's when it'll hit you. When he remarries, you'll realize how much of a mistake you made." It was laughable that I had been cast aside, a discarded woman holding on to some fantasy of independence as if being someone's wife was the only thing that made me valuable. However, I took a close look at my life, carefully considered it, and waited. I had 3 properties, more than enough savings, a gentle, bright young goddaughter who looked after me like family, and a completed first round of cancer treatment with promising results. The doctor said that with regular checkups and proper care, it probably wouldn't shorten my life at all. By all accounts, my days had never been more peaceful or mine, but I didn't bother to explain that to anyone. I had learned the most important lesson of all: you don't owe your peace to anyone's understanding. You should make an account so that I can share my progress with others. She insisted that I do so not only to connect with other painters but also to show other women that it's never too late to start over. You could inspire a lot of people and let them know they're not alone. Eventually, I gave in, and she helped me create an account called Ink and Grace, which is a gentle homage to art and the life we were creating from scratch. I started posting pictures of my progress in a quiet manner, with no talking heads or self-promotion, just the intimate process of brush strokes, colors, and layers forming on canvas. To my surprise, the account grew slowly at first. The platform eventually reached out to collaborate, offering ad partnerships and promotion after slowly gaining more and more followers, some of whom were strangers but were drawn to the quiet beauty of reinvention. I had unintentionally become a modestly popular art creator and was making a little extra money on the side, but I never revealed my face in any of the photos or videos. They only showed my hands at work or the gentle silhouette of me painting in a pool of sunlight, just a woman rebuilding her life in silence, a new beginning without noise, without labels, without apologies, and just like that, the days went by quietly, purposefully, and peacefully. Grace's internship eventually came to an end. The hospital was unable to offer her a permanent position because of her academic credentials, and her job search was also not going well, so I made a decision that even she was surprised by. I offered to pay for her doctoral degree education. I told her that another degree would open more doors than she could imagine, and she sobbed as she thanked me and insisted on writing a promissory note that she would repay me when she was able to stand firmly on her own. At that point, a few old friends began to visit more frequently, but they still seemed more interested in catching up with James than with me. James seemed quieter these days, and one of them said that he used to be so eloquent once. I heard that Vivian will be moving into his house next month. There won't be a wedding, just a dinner with a few friends and family, but whatever. You look healthier and more radiant every time we see you, darling, and I just smiled. Their words didn't bother me anymore because James had finally married the woman he had been dreaming about his entire life, and that was supposed to be his happily ever after. For me, I had long since moved on from that story, but what surprised me was what happened on the day they were scheduled to move in together. I had gone to the hospital for a routine checkup, nothing special, but when I walked into the consultation room, I froze. Anna Leona, Zach, and Olivia were all packed into the room, and I still couldn't speak. James came running over and grabbed my hand with both of his hands. "Why didn't you tell me you had cancer?" His voice was shaking so much that it almost broke. I hadn't seen him in months, and now he looked like a ghost of himself, gaunt and worn down with panic and desperation carved into every line of his face. Daniel's eyes were red. "Mom, how could you keep this from us? If Dad hadn't been cleaning the house and had come across your old medical report, we wouldn't have known how long you were going to conceal this." Zach and Olivia ran over and threw their arms around them. The doctor, who was obviously uncomfortable with the situation, finally spoke up because she's in recovery and emotional stability is essential to her healing. After a long silence, Daniel muttered, "If we had known earlier, we would have hired help. We never meant for you to do everything on your own." Anna quickly added, "Really, Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you. If we'd understood what you're going through, we wouldn't have let you handle everything by yourself, not when you're not feeling well." Grace entered the room after paying my medical bill, and as soon as she heard those words, her face darkened. She approached me and gently held my arm. Her voice was low, firm, and protective. "What did the doctor say about keeping a positive attitude and not letting things like this get to you?" I smiled at her and nodded, saying, "Okay," that one word sent a ripple through the room. Anna froze, and Daniel looked equally shocked. James's face darkened, and his eyes narrowed as they locked on mine. Leona, who had been unusually quiet until now, finally broke her silence with all the tact of a hammer. "Clara, I truly believe." James raised his hand and smacked Daniel hard across the face before I could say anything. His voice was low, but cut like glass, telling Daniel to shut her damn mouth. I don't hit women, so I hit you instead. Don't you ever repeat something so disgraceful again. Daniel looked stunned. He turned and glared at Leona, who shrank back and fell silent, her face flushed with embarrassment. You know how people are these days. That money was supposed to go to Daniel, Anna, Zach, and Olivia, and Zach and Olivia are counting on it too. Grace is my goddaughter, and based on her expression, I could tell she had also been hurt. Her cheeks were red, and her eyes flashed, and I felt my heart burn with rage. I said coldly, does anyone here have a problem with the fact that you already accepted another woman as your new mother? Why can't I choose whose family is to me? I know exactly what kind of person Grace is, and if any of you had shown me even half the warmth and care she has, I wouldn't be standing here today feeling like a stranger. Even if she were after my money, though, it would still be worth it. I'd rather give it all to her than to individuals who only see me as a burden. Without waiting for a response, I turned, took Grace's hand, and left the room. No one followed, but before I left, I saw Daniel and Anna's faces. They weren't angry anymore, not even indignant, they just looked shaken, ashamed, startled, and maybe a little afraid. Days went by quietly and steadily, just as I liked them, and I thought they had finally backed off because I wasn't going to the hospital as much and none of them knew where I lived, or so I thought. However, the very next day, James showed up at my door, and when I opened it, I froze for a moment because he looked worse than he had the day before, with hollowed cheeks, darker circles under his eyes, a rough voice, and a hoarse. I was wondering if I could come in, for he said in a low voice, I just wanted to see how you're doing. I hesitated for a moment, but then I moved aside and let him in without saying anything. I didn't offer him a drink, I didn't say hello, and he wasn't a guest, but he didn't seem to mind. He slowly strolled around the apartment, his eyes scanning the canvases on the walls, paintings in warm tones, layers of color, and vivid strokes. Your voice was soft, almost in awe, your work feels stronger than it used to, and you paused to look at me. Like the woman you were when you were young, something in those words struck a chord with me at the time. I frequently wondered if he ever truly saw me. He continued to walk, taking in every detail. He said, this place is warmer than I expected, it feels like a real home. Our old house just feels like an empty shell. I didn't reply, instead, I returned to my easel and picked up my brush again, but he stood there as if something inside of him had finally exploded. The truth is I never really planned to get back together with her, he said, his voice oddly calm now, as if he had practiced it 1,000 times. After all these years, I realized that it wasn't her I missed. He stepped closer and said, I'm sorry, Clara. I never wanted the divorce, not really. I wasted so many years. Can I have a chance to make it right? I shook my head, but when I found your medical report, everything came into focus. His eyes met mine, and I realized that I never cared for you enough, never truly saw you, and I guess I've cared more than I ever admitted even to myself. I stared at the canvas, wondering where the next stroke should fall. Head, and then a single tear fell onto the canvas, erasing a stroke of color into a gentle blur that was quiet but unmistakable. I think that's enough for today, Dad, I said softly, I have things to do, please leave. I got up and walked him to the door, and as soon as it closed behind him, the tears began to fall more heavily, not for him, but for me, the woman who had spent her entire life trying to warm a heart that never held her close, and now that chapter was over. I started traveling with other artists to plan plein air painting trips, weekend workshops in the countryside, and quiet retreats that filled me with peace. Then, months later, something unexpected happened. I received a bank notification. James had wired me $200,000 along with a brief message that I sold the old house because I thought you might need it for your treatment. James. The kids gradually began tagging along, showing up like awkward guests with practiced concern, holding grocery bags offering fruits and vegetables I never asked for, sometimes even outside my building during my follow-ups, sometimes even outside my building holding grocery bags containing fruits and vegetables I never asked for. As I stared at the screen in shock, I realized that I didn't need the money at all. I had good health insurance, rental properties that generated steady income, an art account that had grown quickly, and AD partnerships that now brought in more than James's monthly pension. I considered returning the money, but the process was difficult, so I kept putting it off. Before I knew it, chaos had already broken out on his end, and the kids were furious and fought with him over it. Daniel accused him of giving away their inheritance, and Leona raged that a woman who wasn't even related would benefit from their future. They didn't see it as compassion, they saw it as betrayal. Those who couldn't spare a thought for me now quarreled bitterly over my worth after I'd already left. I sighed quietly and gave the money back the following day, but James soon returned to my door, saying, the kids say they miss you too, so please come home. I'll take care of myself. This time, I'll help with the grandkids. I really want to start over. Can we try again? I gently but firmly refused him, but he persisted like a stubborn old student clinging to one last lesson and occasionally even brought friends or acquaintances to make a plea on my behalf. I was worn out by it, so I moved again secretly this time and let the rhythm of the road and the flow of color carry me far away from everything I'd once tried so hard to hold together with my artist friends. We would disappear for 10 or 15 days at a time, exploring coastlines, forests, mountains, rivers, and sunsets in Arizona, autumn leaves in Vermont, and cliffs along the Pacific Highway. It was only then that I felt that poem come to life inside of me, and I realized how vast the world is. My collection grew, and my circle did, and fortunately, the cancer never came back. On my 67th birthday, I held my first solo landscape exhibition. It was a bright, sunny day, and my old professor was there in person, standing proudly on stage. To make a special announcement, I would be her last student. That moment caught the attention of the local press, a few art critics, and even some national media. At the end of the exhibition, as I was chatting with some gallery guests, I noticed a familiar face standing quietly in the corner, James, who had lost weight. He was standing motionless in front of one of my paintings, Mountain Falls. I approached him slowly when he saw me, and he seemed surprised and unsure of himself. He asked softly, "You always said you wanted to take me there someday," but I always told him it was too much trouble, so he added almost to himself. I nodded, and I had heard that his health wasn't great lately, something early stage, still treatable, but serious enough that he rarely left home anymore except for doctor's appointments. A moment later, "Mom," I heard familiar voices behind me. Their expressions were a mixture of shock and incredulity as Daniel, Zach, and Olivia turned. They are obviously shocked that I am here, much less in an art gallery with a successful show. James had never informed them that I had resumed painting, and I could see by their attitude that they were unaware of this. Art circles and social media were focusing on me, the increasingly well-known art account Ink and Grace. Anna remarked as she stepped up next to them, "Mom, you look younger than you did 2 years ago. Why didn't you ever inform us that Daniel had been painting all along?" Grandma inquired. "It is amazing," Zach exclaimed with excitement. "I think I want to be an artist." "You're better than the artists we study in school. Like you," Olivia added a beaming smile to my face. When I grew up, and I simply grinned softly without saying anything to Daniel and Leona. Looked worn out and exhausted. I had heard that they had divorced last year, and based on their behavior, observed me, and I could feel the questions lingering in their eyes as they spoke about things they wanted to say or stories they might have wanted to rewriting, but I wasn't going to give them the opportunity because I had other guests to greet, and Grace was already on her way. As I started to leave the exhibition, Dame stood in front of a group of her classmates who were waving and grinning enthusiastically. "I used to hope that you may return someday, but now I understand," he continued, drawing nearer once more and speaking quietly. "You've gone too far, and there's no turning back now." I laughed uncontrollably. "You're right," I answered, "since this is the life that is truly mine. Life's tides come and go, and perhaps we will cross paths again in the future, but when we do, we'll only be longtime friends."